There was a small village surrounded by mountains and thick forests. In this forest lived Titus, a big muscular dwarf. Many years ago, Titus was born to David, a well-respected elder in the village, after so many years of looking for a child. But his joy would turn to painful grief, and then anger. Before the birth of Titus, David and his wife Miriam were a happy couple that had everything they wanted, except a child. Miriam would cry her heart to sleep each night as she begged the gods to give her a child, even if it's just one. 10 years of marriage and no child have turned Miriam into a laughingstock in the village. Some women mock her, calling her a man. Others accuse her of being a witch that eats all her children. This shame continued until Miriam visited the river goddess, who then promised her a child. This child was to become a great man that would be the envy of the entire village. The river goddess also told Miriam that her child will not share her womb with anyone, and that everything he has will be his alone and none will come after him. Miriam didn't understand this prophecy, but she didn't mind. All she wanted was a child to call her own. When she got home to her husband, she told him about the prophecy but kept some details to herself. David was so excited. He would finally become a father. The news gave him great joy that he gathered all his kinsmen to celebrate. A few weeks later, Miriam took in. As months went by and her tummy began to grow, the women that used to mock her now tried to share in her joy. She became the talk of the town. Some wondered how she managed to get pregnant at last. Others speculate as to whether she had done some sacrifice to make the gods favor her and remove the curse on her womb. Miriam didn't care about the stories being spread about her and her baby. She was just delighted to be finally respected as a woman, one who would soon be a mother. 9 months quickly passed, but Miriam didn't go into labor. This was strange. David was so worried for his wife. He knew that if anything were to happen to the baby, Miriam would be broken. She was an orphan. Her uncle and relatives had abandoned her since the death of her parents. He was all she had, and for that reason, he had refused to take another wife, because he didn't want to make her feel any worse about herself than she already does. Also, he loved her very much. As Miriam's pregnancy got past the 11th month, David was advised to take her to the chief priest to perform a ritual to appease the gods. The gods must be punishing him for a crime he committed in his youth, some villagers murmured. David headed the advice and took his wife to the chief priest of the village. After the rituals, the chief priest told David that the child his wife was carrying was not an ordinary child, and that only the baby can decide when to come down. That all they can do is to wait and hope the wife survives it. On the 12th month of her pregnancy, Miriam went into labor. For 12 hours, she was in pain. She cried and wailed and cried some more. After so many hours of pain, the baby Titus was born. At last, Miriam was a mother. However, the sight of the baby would be the last thing she saw before she passed on. David could not believe his ill luck. What sort of a child is this? He wondered aloud. A child I have waited 12 years for came on the 12th month of pregnancy, after 12 hours of labor, killed his mother on his way out, only to be this ugly with a big head and small body. David exclaimed as tears poured down his eyes. The gods must be wicked to reward my patience with this monster. With those words, David grabbed the newborn baby, leaving his wife's dead body with the midwives, as he went straight to the forest. It was the middle of the night. Most of the villagers were asleep. The ones that had come to stay with him tried to stop him, but he was a strong and powerful warrior. They couldn't overpower him. After going some distance into the forest, David dropped the baby on the ground with tears in his eyes. You were promised by the gods. I will leave you here for the gods. Hopefully they take you away from this world you have come to destroy, you little monster. With those words, David left his newborn baby in the forest as he ran straight home to mourn the death of his wife. The next morning, he told the villagers that the baby didn't make it, and that he had to bury it in the forest just after the wife died. No one bothered to question him. He was grieving the loss of his wife, and all the people could do was offer him comfort. forgetting all about little Titus, whose life was just about to begin. It was now 20 years after the birth of Titus. The village was preparing for the great feast, an annual festival held to commemorate the great warriors that fought to liberate the kingdom from slave masters. This festival usually lasts for 7 days. It features combats, horse races, and lots of drinking, dancing, and celebrations. This year's event, however, was different because it fell on the birthday of the king. To keep with his usual tradition of hunting wild animals in the forest to celebrate his birthday, King Dyke declared that anyone that brings him the biggest surprise from the forest will have the king's reward. And so the hunt began. The village hunters, knowing how dangerous the forest could be, decided to go together in a group. 3 days into their hunt, they still hadn't killed any animal. It was a frustrating hunt. That was until Obinna, the best hunter in the village, told everyone in the group to keep silent and that he was hearing footsteps. "I think it is coming from above." Before he could complete his sentence, a heavy force hit him on his head, immediately knocking him to the ground. All the other hunters couldn't believe what they were seeing, took to their heels and left Obinna on the floor with his gun. "Run! It's the forest monster! Run!" The oldest in the group screamed out as the others ran after him for cover. For some years, hunters that dared to cross into this part of the forest have reported sighting a strange creature they said looked like a human, but was covered with hair all over its body. The only distinguishing feature of this strange creature from humans was that it moved on 4 limbs. No hunter had ever gotten close enough to see what it was. They were all too scared of its speed and the strength they saw it exhibit. Even though they had guns, they were scared to use them. If there was any hunter in all of this village who could challenge this strange creature, it would be Obinna. But here he was knocked out with just 1 blow by the creature. When the other hunters got back to the village and shared the news with King Dyke, fear gripped the heart of the villagers. "Does it mean the myth is true?" the king asked. "The strange creature is not just scary stories told by hunters. It is indeed true." The king continued, "Yes, my king. We all saw it with our own eyes. It knocked out Obinna with just a single blow to the head." One of the hunters replied, "Gather my warriors at once. We must go to that forest and kill this creature for my birthday and rescue Obinna, our village hunter." The king commanded, "My king, please, let us not rush into attacking this monster. It may be dangerous for the entire village." One of the elders replied to the king, "What do you mean?" The king queried. Now, turning to the hunters, the elder asked, "Did this creature chase you as you turned to run away?" "No. It stood and watched Obinna's body as it laid on the ground." The hunter replied, "My king, we should look to capture it instead. Let us be cautious and know what it is before we give the kill order." The elder said, "Very well," said the king. "Send the strongest warriors of the village and let them capture this strange creature and bring it here for me." With those words, the king left the hunters to deliberate with the warriors as they got ready to launch a rescue mission into the forest. "Let me go, please. Let me go." Obinna cried and begged Titus, who kept staring at him in the eyes. "Who are you? Do you speak? You look like a human." Obinna kept talking, but Titus wouldn't say a word. "You are not going to kill me. If you wanted to kill me, you would have done that already," Obinna said to Titus, who had used a very strong rope to tie his hands behind his back to prevent him from running. Suddenly, Titus hears a twig fall in the nearby bushes. His sense of smell, so high, immediately gave the warriors away. And to Obinna's surprise, Titus jumped from the floor and onto the tallest tree in the forest. Before Obinna could know it, he had disappeared from sight. "Help! I am right here! Help!" Obinna screamed at the top of his voice. "Hold on," one of the warriors said to his group. "I think I heard something," another one said. As they maneuvered their way through the thick forest, they heard the voice again, this time coming from behind them. "Help! I am right here! Help!" Now certain of where the voice was coming from, the warriors ran towards that direction. battle ready. But before they knew what hit them, 3 of them were already on the floor, lifeless. Titus had used same trick again, this time coming from above the warriors with a stick that quickly knocked them out, leaving only one standing. Uchenna was the strongest of all warriors in the village. He had never lost a man-to-man combat. He was undefeated in all the great festival wrestling. But here he was face to face with the smallest man-like creature he had ever seen. He didn't even know how to fight Titus because he was so small and only had a big head. Titus charged at him with great speed, and in just a matter of seconds, Uchenna was on his back, struggling to breath as the little creature gave him a chokehold. "Please don't kill me, we didn't come to kill you. Please just let us go. We only want you to come with us," Uchenna cried out. Somehow, Titus understood the fear in his voice and released him. Staring deep into his eyes, Titus finally spoke. "Get your brothers and get out of here before I change my mind." Shocked beyond words, Uchenna continued to stare at Titus. "You can talk?" Uchenna asked out to Titus. "Of course I can talk. I am a human being like you, just smaller in stature, now go." With those words, Titus turned its back and in a flashing speed disappeared into the forest. Uchenna still couldn't believe what he had just experienced. Forgetting all he had come with to the forest, he ran back into the village, breathing as if he had seen a ghost. "He can talk. He is human. He can talk. He is human," he kept screaming as he ran for the king's palace. All the elders were gathered awaiting the return of the warriors and Obinna. But to their dismay, they saw Uchenna running towards them in panic mode. "Somebody stop him," the king roared at his guards, who quickly blocked Uchenna's path. "What madness is this? Where are the others?" the king asked a visibly frightened Uchenna. "They are dead, my king. He can talk, he is human," Uchenna replied, still mumbling the phrase to himself. "What are you talking about?" one of the elders shouted at Uchenna. "How did they die? What really happened in that forest?" Another elder asked him. "We were moving very carefully through the forest when we suddenly heard a voice scream from behind us. The voice was that of Obinna. We stopped and hurriedly moved towards the voice as he kept screaming for our help. Suddenly, without warning, the mysterious man jumped down from the tree with a big branch in his hands. With one single strike, he took out 3 of my men. I tried to fight him, but he was too quick and too strong for me. He threw me to the floor and tried to strangle me. When I screamed begging him to let me live, that we didn't come to kill him, he released me and told me to get my brothers and get out of here." Uchenna narrated his ordeal to the king and his elders. "Did you just call him a mysterious man?" one of the elders quickly asked Uchenna. "Yes, my elder. When I asked him, he said he was human like me and that he was only smaller in stature." As Uchenna laid there on the ground trying to catch his breath, the elders were now silent, shocked by what they had just heard. Who could this be, and how has he survived in the forest for this long? The king finally spoke. "He is my son, and he will be the death of us all." Elder David, who had been listening to Uchenna keenly all this while, spoke up to the amazement of all. "Did you just say he is your son?" The king stood up angrily, looking straight at Elder David. "You said your son died at birth along with his mother. So how is the mysterious man in the forest your son?" The king continued. "My king, I did what I thought was right. Just after the death of my wife, I took the child out to the forest to kill him. There was a prophecy over his life that made me believe he was evil and not deserving of the breath he drew. He killed my wife." Elder David replied to the king, his voice now shaking. "What prophecy are you talking about?" one of the elders asked. "Before he was born, my wife was told by the water goddess that she would have a child, and that the child will not share her womb with anyone, and that everything he has will be his alone and none will come after him." Elder David replied, "I didn't understand those words at first, but when my wife died, it all became clear to me that this boy was evil and had come to ruin me and all I hold dear. So I took him out to the forest to kill and bury him. But when I got there, I couldn't do it. Elder David concluded. So you left a baby in the forest to die? The voice of the chief priest startled everyone. You have brought a great abomination to our land, and only you can remedy this. The chief priest concluded. What do you mean, wise one? The king asked out to the chief priest. Elder David is the richest man in this village, but the time has come for him to leave this village, if not the wrath of the gods will be mighty upon us. The chief priest told the elders in council. You must banish him, and he must live out the rest of his days in isolation from everyone. With those words, the chief priest stood up to leave the presence of the king. Silence fell on the entire council. No one could utter a word. This village had been peaceful and prosperous all through the reign of King Dyke. But everyone knows that the true power behind the throne has been the support of Elder David, who is mostly referred to as the wealthiest man alive. He has always been a strong ally of the king, and the two have been friends for so long. But if what the chief priest had just revealed to them is true, then the king would have to banish his friend and strongest ally from the kingdom. As he got to the door, the chief priest turned slowly and said to the king, You have until the day of the great festival to decide. A great war is coming. I hope you chose the right side. With those words, he disappeared. King Dyke couldn't hide his dismay. He stood up and left the throne room into his bedchamber. His mind clouded with the news he just got. One after the other, the elders disappeared from the palace. Back in the forest, Obinna laid on the floor, wondering what had happened to the voices he had heard coming towards him earlier. They are dead. No one is coming to save you. You are now my prisoner and will remain so until the great festival. Titus said to him as he climbed down from a tree nearby. Obinna, who was just learning that Titus could talk, was left in shock. Who are you and how did you come to stay in the forest? Obinna asked Titus, terrified of every word. I will tell you who I am and how I have managed to survive this dangerous place. But first, it is time for dinner. You have to eat something. I don't want you to die, because I need you. Titus replied. You need me for what? Obinna asked. You are the greatest hunter in the village, are you not? When the time comes, you will know exactly why I saved your life. Titus replied. Did you say you saved my life? From what exactly? We came to hunt for the great festival and you kidnapped me. How is that saving my life? Obinna asked. I see you have so many questions. You will get your chance to ask at the right time. For now, come with me. It is time to eat. With that, Titus dragged Obinna to a little hut in the middle of the forest. The hut was covered with grass and no one would have known that there was a shelter there. Inside was very dark and only dimly lit with a tiny lamp. Welcome to my home, Titus said to Obinna. You don't look pleased. Do you want to stay out there for the lions and other wild animals to find? Oh, by the way, we are eating one of them for dinner. Titus continued speaking to a frightened Obinna as he brought out some roasted meat for him to eat. Obinna was dying of hunger and had no time to ask what meat it was. He quickly devoured the animal and cleaned his mouth. See, I saved your life, Titus exclaimed, looking directly at Obinna. Why have you captured me as your prisoner? Obinna asked. Go to sleep. Tomorrow is a big day for us. Titus replied as he left Obinna in the hut alone. Word of Obinna's abduction quickly spread round the entire village. People were scared when they heard that a mysterious man living in the village had taken their best hunter captive. But it got worse when rumors started that it was the son of the late Miriam and Elder David. Sitting outside his house alone in the dark, Elder David could be seen contemplating his next line of action. He had spent his entire life in this village. If he is thrown out now, where would he go? What will be of his legacy in the land? I will stay and fight. I am not leaving this village, not until death, Elder David said to himself. It was a long night. The morning of the festival was not as exciting as it used to be. All the elders were sad and looked unhappy over the news of the previous day. The king was not happy either. It appears no one would be claiming the king's reward this year, he thought to himself as he watched the village masquerade dance before the large crowd that had come out for the festivities. Elder David did not leave his house that morning. Even though the king had not pronounced his banishment yet, the feeling was already in the air. My people, a strange thing has happened in our land. King Dyke stood up to address the crowd. Something that will visit upon us the wrath of the gods if we do not heed their warnings and act accordingly. Yesterday, we learnt that Elder David had committed an abominable act in the eyes of the gods. Even though he is a man of high standing in our community, we must now take the bold step to follow the instructions of the gods. The king concluded as everywhere remained silent. Suddenly, voices began to murmur in the crowd. People were audibly gasping and some were screaming and running. The king and his elders were wondering what was going on. And then they saw it. It was Titus, and with him was Obinna. Titus was dragging Obinna with him to the center of the arena. And as he passed through the crowd, everyone hurriedly gave way out of fear. Who is this beast? Villagers screamed. I am not a beast. I am one of you, a member of this village just like you all. Titus replied as everyone kept quiet to hear him speak. The king and the elders were stunned seeing what was happening. All the king's guards were now alert to any danger that might arise from the little man. 20 years ago, my father left me for dead in the great forest. My only crime was that I was born a dwarf. The night of my birth, I was left to die in the forest. But thanks to the gods, I am alive. For 20 years, I have suffered, hoping for this day to come. Now I have come to challenge your warriors to a fight for the crown. Titus concluded as everyone turned towards the king in shock. You see, King Dyke had no child of his own. He is the only surviving member of his family. After the death of his father, he assumed the throne but refused to take a second wife even though he knew his wife was barren. With no heir to succeed him, Dyke came up with an unusual way of selecting the next king. During one of the great feasts held in honor of warriors of the village, King Dyke told his people that, going forward, they will choose their next kings in a man-to-man combat. Whoever wins will take the throne when the reigning king dies. The combat was to be held on the king's birthday, every 5 years. The defending champion is to compete with anyone who dared to challenge him for the throne. The combat was open to all male citizens of the village, except the renowned village warriors. Titus knew this, and he was well within his rights to partake in the combat. The challenge was that Obinna, who he had captured prisoner, was the last champion, hence, he would have to fight Titus in a man-to-man combat to protect the village from going to a dwarf that everyone was afraid of fighting. Obinna's mouth was wide open when he heard Titus's challenge. This was a fight to the death. Only the winner survives. Now he had seen what Titus was capable of. How can he avoid this fight? Please don't kill me. I don't want it. You can take it. Obinna cried out bitterly. And what will be the fun in that? If I wanted to kill you, I would have done it since yesterday. Now shut up and watch me save your life. Titus replied as he turned his attention to the king and his elders who were quietly looking at both men. Your Highness, choose your champion. Anyone. If I kill him, you will give up your throne today and now. If I lose, you rid yourself of a monster that my father believes will be the death of you all. King Dyke couldn't believe this imp was challenging him and his reign. He was not going to be a coward before his own people, so he named his most powerful warrior in the kingdom, Uchenna. Uchenna stepped into the ring undefeated in all fights he had ever fought in. But this was different. It ended as quickly as it had begun. The screams and shouts hailing Uchenna quickly died down as his dead body thuds on the ground. The king's head bowed in shame, his elders with him. When will you surrender your crown? Or should I say my crown now? Titus asked the king. Do you really think we will let you walk in here to seize my throne and rule over us? King Dyke asked. Guards, take him dead or alive. As soon as those words rang out from the king, the people began to scream as they ran for their lives from the palace. Chaos immediately took hold. Out of nowhere, warriors in their thousands, all on horses, were riding towards Titus. Seeing the danger he was in, Titus charged towards them like a bullet, and one after the other he took them down with brutal force. Using their own weapons against them, Titus overpowered all the village warriors, leaving bodies scattered all over the palace. Back in his house, Elder David had heard what was going on in the palace, and he decided to seize the moment for himself. He quickly called one of his servants and sent him to his private camp where he had been training a militia. This was the moment he had been waiting for. 5 years ago, having spent the last 15 years accumulating wealth and expanding his businesses, Elder David had presented a grand plan to revitalize the village. Speaking with a few of the elders he had won over, he said, "Our King Dyke is weak. You all know it. He is not a great warrior like his father before him. He has no heir to succeed him, so he introduces a ridiculous succession plan that has led to the brutal fighting and killing in the ring for the past 2 decades. I am willing to change all that, if you will support me to dethrone the weakling we have ruling over us." The elders were shocked to hear of this treasonous plot by Elder David. However, they knew he spoke the truth. King Dyke was trying to change the traditions of the land by introducing a new way of succession, something the elders were not sure will remain in place when the next king eventually takes the throne. "But you two have no heir to succeed you should this plan go through. So what becomes of succession if you were crowned king and later died?" One of the elders asked David. "Oh, I intend to take a wife once I seize the throne. I will marry a princess, someone of royal blood. We will build a long-lasting dynasty that will bring back stability to our village." Elder David replied. Even though it was a dangerous plan, the elders in his corner agreed with him. They swore to an oath of secrecy and gave Elder David the go-ahead to start by putting together his own militia. So for 5 whole years, he had been training and feeding this militia. And now, with chaos in the king's palace, and his place in the council now threatened, Elder David felt it was time to start the coup. "Tell the general commander to ready his men and meet me at the bridge. We will march from there to the palace and seize the throne," Elder David said to his servant as he readied his horse. In the campground, hidden just at the outskirts of the village, stood 5,000 battle-ready foot soldiers who had trained day and night for this moment. "The time has come to take the kingdom for blood and glory. This is the moment we were trained for. Today we will write our names into the history books. Songs will be sung in our honor. Tales would be told of our victory. The kingdom will be ours." With those words, the general commander urged his men forward as they marched on the palace. Titus was standing amidst many dead bodies scattered on the floor where he had just battled men with horses and weapons of all kinds. "What do you want?" King Dyke asked out to him. "Name your price and you will have it, for you have proven yourself deserving of the king's reward. You can have anything you desire, but I will never surrender my throne to an imp," the king declared. "So how do you plan to stop me?" Titus asked. "You will have to kill me to get your hands near my crown. And if you kill me, my people will never follow you," the king replied. "You think I am the worst threat to your throne? Wait until my father's men get here, and then you see just how much your people love you," Titus said to the king. "What is he talking about?" the king asked his elders, who were now as worried as he was. "Is Elder David rebelling against the throne?" The king shouted at his elders with a searing anger. "We do not know my king," one of the elders replied. As they continued to bicker amongst themselves, they began to feel the ground shake as though an earthquake was about to happen. As they listened, the sound grew louder, and just like a flash of the light, the militia was upon them. King Dyke's guards were less than 1,000 men, and they were not as well trained as the militia. The palace guards were no match for the men of Elder David. The battle was intense and bloody. Bodies were littered everywhere. By the time it was all over, only about 3,000 men were standing, all of Elder David's militia. The elders who remained loyal to King Dyke were arrested and thrown into the dark cell. But the king was missing. "Where is he?" Elder David asked the prisoners. He was here when the fighting began. We don't know how he managed to escape. One of the arrested elders replied. I'm sure he won't go far. One of my men had stabbed him and he is losing a lot of blood. The general commander said to Elder David. Find him at once. As long as he remains alive, the people will remain loyal to him. Find him and kill him. I want to see his head. With those words, Elder David picked up the crown which had fallen from King Dyke's head during the fighting as he proceeded to the throne room. What of the imp? The general commander asked out to Elder David. Kill him first. Elder David replied as he took his seat on the great throne. Word of the coup spread around the entire village. People locked themselves indoors, afraid of what will become of them if they are thought to be against the new king. In the forest, Titus and Obina dragged the body of the wounded King Dyke into the hut. Blood covered his entire body. How did you know they were coming to kill him? How did you know everything would work out like you planned? Why didn't you at least inform the people of what was about to happen immediately we got there? That would have saved so many lives. Obina lamented to Titus, who was now attending to the wounds of the king. You talk too much for a hunter. Maybe I should have killed you too. Titus replied. You said you needed my help, but you only used me as bait to get those innocent warriors killed, which only left the king exposed. Now all his men are dead and your father sits on the throne. Maybe you have been working with your father all along. You are right. Maybe I am my father's secret weapon. I guess we will never know. For now, we must let the king rest. My father's men will be coming for us soon. Titus replied to a visibly frustrated Obina, ignoring all his ranting. At the palace, King David, as he is being called now, seats on the throne. His militia armed to the teeth, waiting to pounce on any form of threat. It was now 3 years after the coup that removed Dyke from power. David now has his most loyal elders by his side. With the fighting now over, his attention was turned to ruling and he was immediately changing things in his image. His first act was changing the name of the kingdom to Zimba. Then, with a royal decree, he announced that the line of succession will be by birthright. His firstborn male child will inherit the throne from him when he dies. With his enormous wealth, he started the construction of a new palace and began the process of bringing development to the kingdom of Zimba. But even with all the change he brought, his people still looked at him as the usurper. No one loved him as their new king. He had publicly executed all the arrested elders who spoke up against him. He even had the chief priest executed and replaced by his stooge. My son is no fool. If he had Dyke, then he is planning something against me. He already has a reason to hate me. So we must find him before he comes for us all. King David said to his cabinet, I agree, my king. But all the warriors we have sent into the forest have reported no sighting of him nor the deposed king. An elder replied, Send more spies into the neighboring villages and kingdoms. Find him and bring me his head. King David replied, They both have reasons to kill themselves. David and his son Titus have been enemies right from the birth of the boy. But how will it end? Will Titus finally kill his father, restoring the kingdom to King Dyke? Or will David have the final say and end the monster that killed his wife?
This story is about to get even more interesting. Therefore, I really need to know that you are enjoying the story. So, say something in the comment section. Or you can comment whatever it is that you like. I really want to see that you guys are enjoying the story for me to be motivated to post the next story. So please, first of all, subscribe. Secondly, please make sure to like the video. And thirdly, please write a comment, write anything. So, first of all, tell me how interesting the story is and what you've actually learned.
In the last episode, Titus escaped his father's warriors as he and Obina dragged the deposed King Dyke with them into the forest, away from David who had taken the throne. King David the usurper sent hundreds of warriors into neighboring villages and kingdoms in search of his son Titus and the deposed king. He was restless. The people of Zimba have still not accepted him as their king. They were still praying and hoping for the return of their one true king, Dyke. As a result of their lack of loyalty to him, David unleashed terror upon them, with all the villagers gripped with fear. As long as he's not dead, Dyke will remain in their hearts. I need his head so I can display it for all to see. King David roars to his cabinet, who are now growing weary about the king's state of mind. Since the battle at the great feast, David has not been himself. Before now, he was haunted by the shadow of his son, Titus the dwarf, whom he had left in the forest to die. Now, his mind is unusually clouded with thoughts of King Dyke, whom he had deposed, and of course his son who helped King Dyke get away. "My king, we will find them," an elder replies, trying to calm David, who was visibly distraught. Across the Black Sea, Titus and Obinna are trying their best to keep the identity of King Dyke hidden. After fighting off and killing some of his father's mercenaries sent to assassinate them, Titus decides they journey across the sea into the grasslands, where he tells King Dyke they could get some slave soldiers to join their course. "My king, we will fight to retake the kingdom. We just need to find the House of Whispers. There, we will talk to the slave masters and hopefully we can buy some soldiers to join us in the fight." Titus proposes calmly to King Dyke, who now dresses in rags to avoid drawing any attention to himself. "Did you say hopefully? It's been 3 years since your father seized my kingdom. Thanks to you. Now I hear he has unleashed terror on my people. Yet you will not even tell me the full story of whatever is going on between you two. How did you know of his plot to take over my kingdom? And why are you helping me? Until you tell me what I need to know, I am done taking any more advice from you." King Dyke replies to Titus in frustration. Obinna, who was sitting and paying attention to the argument between King Dyke and Titus, decided to step in and break the tension that was now building between the two. "My king, you cannot question the loyalty of Titus. He saved your life and mine. He will tell us his story in his own time. We need him," Obinna says to the king. "I will tell you everything." Titus interrupts Obinna, who was still speaking. "I will tell you my whole story," he continues. "But then you will promise me that whatever happens, you will not kill my father." Titus stopped talking as he looked at King Dyke directly in the eyes, waiting for his reply. The king was shocked at this request. "Do you know what you are asking me?" the king asks Titus in shock. "That I should forgive treason? You want me to pardon the man who killed all my loyal subjects and stole my father's throne? Is that your condition for helping me?" King Dyke asks Titus, whose head was now bowed, pondering every word. "You want my help. That is my only condition. You will not kill him." Titus replies to the king, his voice stern. "Tell me what happened to you and why are you in this fight with your father?" King Dyke asks Titus, trying to understand this request. "All I know of my father is what I was told by the woman who raised me." Titus began narrating his story. "I know the entire village thinks I'm a monster and that I grew up in the forest all by myself. But that is not true. After my father left me in the forest to die, at the foot of the great baobab tree, Nana found me. She was the daughter of the forest." "You mean you were raised by the daughter of the forest?" King Dyke interrupts Titus with great shock on his face. "Yes," Titus replies. "Who is this daughter of the forest?" Obinna asks curiously, not understanding why the king was so shocked about her raising Titus. "The evil forest has been dreaded for ages because of a woman that was banished by my great-grandfather, King Ikenna." Dyke interrupts Titus to begin narrating his own story. "It was a time of great famine in our village. People were dying of hunger as their farm crops suffered from a serious plague. Some elders believed it was caused by the wrath of the gods. The famine was severe in the entire kingdom, but it was worse for poor people with nothing to rely on except their farmlands. One of those who lost everything during this famine was Nina. Nina was married to a farmer and they had one daughter together. The family lived a happy life even though it was a short one. A few months after the famine began, Nina's husband disappeared. Nina and her daughter were so worried that they went to his farm, where he said he was going to look for him, but there was no sign of him. Being a well-known farmer in his community, people began asking questions when no one saw him for weeks. The village elders came together to organize search parties, but no one saw any trace of him. Nina's in-laws began mounting pressure on her, telling her to provide their son. After weeks of searching and fighting within the family, Nina began noticing a very bad smell coming from her backyard. This was concerning, but she didn't suspect anything. That was until her neighbors started perceiving the smell as well. The neighbors raised an alarm and the villagers decided to dig the ground behind Nina's house. This was when they uncovered the most shocking thing in the history of the entire kingdom. It was the body of Nina's husband, buried in a shallow grave. Someone had killed him and hidden his body there. King Dyke paused his story, as if waiting for Titus and Obina to ask him questions. "So who killed him?" Obina asked. "Well, according to my father, the villagers didn't wait long before pointing fingers at Nina. They also had neighbors who said they had fought the previous night before his disappearance." The king replied, "But why will she kill her husband?" Obina asked again. Titus looks uninterested in the story of King Dyke. "Titus, don't you want to know what happened?" The king asks. "She didn't kill her husband." Titus replies to the king. "What?" King Dyke turns to look at Titus with a curious look on his face. "She did not kill her husband. And yes, King Ikenna and the elders banished her and her daughter from the village based on the testimonies of people that didn't like her. The villagers didn't care about the truth, they just wanted justice. But what was done to that poor woman and her daughter is a grave injustice." Titus replies to the king, trying to control the anger building up inside. "What are you talking about?" King Dyke asks Titus, looking so ignorant of what he was saying. "You didn't know?" Titus looks sharply at the king. "Know what?" King Dyke replies, still looking confused. "Your father lied to you, maybe to protect you. King Ikenna was pressured into banishing that poor woman and her daughter from the village. Nina's husband was in fact killed by his own elder brother over a land dispute. He buried the body at Nina's backyard to frame her, since the family was already mounting pressure on her. To prevent the truth from coming out, the wicked man bribed the elders and the chief priest. The chief priest took it one step further when he casted a spell on Nina and her daughter, effectively turning them into wild animals. Nina died shortly after, leaving the daughter in the forest all by herself. But she survived. This is how the daughter came to be known as the daughter of the forest. Titus concluded. Everyone was silent when Titus was done. Then the king spoke. "And how did you get to know all these?" "I made it my mission to know everything about my background, the family I came from, and most importantly, the man who wanted me dead at birth." Titus replied, "What has your background got to do with the story of Nina and her daughter?" Obina asked. "Everything, because the wicked man who killed his own brother over a land dispute and casted a spell on his late brother's wife was my grandfather." Titus answered. The shock on their faces said it all. Obina and King Dyke could not believe the connection. Before Nina died, she placed a curse on him, that he and his children would be tormented by his offspring. The only way to break this curse is to confess to what really happened. Titus added, "But your grandfather is dead? Or are you saying?" "Yes, my grandfather told my father everything before he died." Titus interrupts King Dyke before he could complete his question. "It's a family secret that must be passed on from one generation to another." Titus added. Obina was looking so confused at this point. "What is the family secret that is worth sharing here?" "The fact that your grandfather was a murderer," he asked. "You have all missed the very important part of this whole story. None of you could still figure out why my grandfather would kill his brother over a land, and then bribe an entire cabinet to keep it secret, and also cast a spell on his brother's poor widow as well as his niece." Titus asked furiously to the king and Obina, and just like a flash of lightning, it dawned on them. Both men jumped to their feet, screaming at the same time, "The land! Of course it was the land." Titus replied, "There's a huge deposit of gold and other solid minerals on this land. That is how my father was able to grow his wealth in the past 15 years. His father couldn't do it because he wanted to avoid all suspicion having taken over the land from Nina and her daughter upon the passing of his brother. So he instructed my father on what the land holds. My father too had to wait a few years to begin his exploration of the land. That is where his secret militia that overthrew you is camped. Titus concluded. His face was disfigured with sadness. Titus, is this why you need your father alive? King Dyke asked. Yes, my king, Titus replied. He needs to confess and break the spell off Nina's daughter, so she can die a peaceful death. She is old now, but she deserves some closure. She has suffered enough. I want to help clear her mother's name before she dies. He added, do you mind me asking how you gathered all this information? King Dyke asked Titus again. This is the part one can't share with you, my king. Titus replied to the king as they heard footsteps approaching them in their hideout. I think they've found us, Obina said as the three men got up quickly and dashed for their weapons. One of David's spies in the grasslands has been able to locate Titus. His size made him so difficult to miss. With word quickly sent to his father, David had mobilized his assassins to take all three men out. How many men do you see? Obina asks Titus. 10, maybe 20. Titus replies, wait, there's more. It's a whole army. King Dyke quickly interjects. From where? My father doesn't have such influence here to mobilize an army and be bold enough to parade them. Titus replies, so how do you explain this? Obina asks Titus, pointing through the window where they've hidden themselves as they count the armed men marching towards them. Oh, that? Relax, those are my men. Titus replies. King Dyke and Obina were shocked to hear those words. Titus had told them they were going to the House of Whispers to speak with slave masters for a possibility of buying some slaves to join their cause. He didn't say anything about having some fighters of his own ready to team up with the slaves they were going to buy. As King Dyke and Obina tried to get Titus to explain the situation to them, David's men were being taken care of by the small army that had marched down to join Titus on his quest to take Zimba and his father's gold mine. You didn't tell me we were walking into an ambush, Titus asks the commander of the army that had just joined his cause. That is hardly an ambush. However, we've just learnt that you are being followed. The commander replies, we have to change our plans. You can no longer use the initial route agreed. He added, what is going on? King Dyke asks, these men are following us to the House of Whispers, but they won't enter the city. They will wait outside for my signal. Titus replies, signal for what? The king asks, we are not buying the slaves. We are setting them free. They will join us once they've been liberated. Titus replies, have you gone mad? Obina asks Titus in a furious tone. Do you want to jeopardize the quest of the king in some fight for glory? He added, did you just say fight for glory? Titus asks Obina, is that what you think this is? He continued, listen carefully. These people right here are my brothers. And the folks we're going to liberate are my brothers too. Yes, the part of the story I didn't tell you was that I spent 3 years with them in that dungeon as a slave. And I won't leave them there knowing that I can help set them free from their chains. With those words, Titus turns to leave. This is not our fight, we must abort mission. It doesn't matter the history you have with them. Obina replies, no, we will go ahead with the plan. But don't keep things from me again. King Dyke said, turning to Titus with a stern warning. I will tell you what you need to know, my king. Titus replied as the battalion began their march towards the slave city. The House of Whispers is a huge castle located in an ancient slave city deep in the mountains. It is believed that the city was built with slave labor and the masters built an impregnable castle from where they oversee their business. The business being buying and selling of slaves as well as using the strong slaves captured in battles for entertainment in pit fights. Most of the citizens of Slave City are children of former slaves themselves. Their pride comes from the fact that they earned their freedom. Those who are not strong enough to join the fighters in the pits live out their days as slaves, working in the farms of their owners. Others are used by the city council to build and maintain infrastructures in the city. So the culture and values of this city is still very much rooted in slavery. While outsiders see them as suffering people that need urgent liberation from their slave masters, the inhabitants of the city hold former slaves in high regard, seeing how everyone watched them fight in the pits to earn their freedom. In Slave City, only the strong ever get to be free and procreate when they achieve that freedom from the pits. If they're so strong, Why are they not trying to escape from their chains and possibly take the city for themselves? After all, the masters are few. Obina asks. That is not how the human mind works. The army commander replied. General Erasmus was once a slave in this city. Just like Titus, he too had fought in the pits to earn his freedom. The strength of these masters is not in their numbers. The general continues. These slaves have been conditioned to believe that there is glory in winning a fight in the pit. They've been made to believe that killing their fellow slave for sport will immortalize them, and by gaining freedom from the pits with the sword, you etch your name in the sands of time. General Erasmus pauses as he turns to look at Titus. He opened our eyes to see how evil killing people for sports was, he says, pointing at Titus. Was this before or after he started living in the forest? Obina asked the general. The forest has always been his home. He was captured some years back, when he attempted to leave. When he gained his freedom, his mission changed. That's enough. Titus interrupts General Erasmus before he could complete what he wanted to say about Titus. Get your men ready. You will meet heavy resistance if our plan A fails. Titus said as he turned his attention to King Dyke. You will stay with them. If we fail, run for the forest and hope my father never catches you. Titus said to the king. You want me to cower here while you play the hero, trying to restore my crown? Impossible, retorted the king. What would you have me do? You are the king. It would take just an arrow to end our mission. It's too risky, you stay. Titus responded. Let the king go with you, that way he can lead the negotiation. Coming from a king, the masters will consider our request and then we can strike when they least expect. This will limit casualty on both sides. General Erasmus countered. Very well, but then we will need one of your strongest men to always stay behind the king. Titus said. I have just the one you'll need. Erasmus replied excitedly as he pointed at a scary-looking warrior with scars on his face. Scar will go with you, General Erasmus said. Weird name, but not so weird when you consider the face. Does he always talk like this? General Erasmus asks Titus. I've been meaning to take his tongue. Just haven't got enough time on my hands yet. Titus replies as they depart for the castle, leaving Erasmus and the remaining soldiers to make camps in the bush, just outside the city gate. Titus has a large network of spies that he uses to communicate. While making this trip to Slave City, he had activated all his spies in the region and they've communicated to him all the safe routes to use and how to avoid people suspected to be working for his father. What if your father has his network working in the city? King Dyke asks Titus. I would have known about it by now. Titus replies confidently. He knew the city like the back of his hand. Even though he was only here for a few years, after being captured by slave traders, he was loved by people who frequented the fighting pits as a result of his exploits there. However, on this day, Titus knew within him that something was not right. Ever since General Erasmus and his men killed the assassins on their way here and informing him that someone was leaking information of their movements, Titus has been uncomfortable. I am not comfortable with you coming with us, but since you insisted on being here, you will stay behind me and not say a word. Titus said to King Dyke. I insisted on coming because I want to be part of the conversation, so how will my keeping mute help our course? The king asked Titus. We're here, Titus said to the group as they approached two guards standing just outside the castle gate. Who are you and why are you here? The guards asked out to Titus and his group. We're... As Titus opened his mouth to speak to the guards, Obina whistled and turned facing Titus, King Dyke and Scar. Almost immediately, about 20 men armed with swords and archers began coming out of their hideouts. You can kill the one with the scar. Only 2 of them are needed, Obina said to the armed assassins who have now surrounded Titus and his group. It was you? King Dyke said to Obina in shock. But how? We've been together all the while. No one saw you leave, so how? The king continues to wonder out loud. He couldn't understand how Obina was able to meet up with David's men and plan this betrayal. I think when you are a very good hunter, it comes with a few skills. Obina replied with a smug look on his face. Why did you do this? Titus asks Obina. I trusted you to help me. which was why I spared your life in the forest, remember? Titus continues. What did my father offer you? Gold. Obina replied. You see, unlike both of you, I have a child and a wife I care about. I have been away from them for far too long. First it was you who kidnapped me, then used me to protect a weak king who has no heir. I am just some tool for all of you to use in your grand plans. You to take back your throne, and you for vengeance against your father, who, by the way, is king now and has a lot of gold. He continues, in what part of your plans do I get some reward for all the inconvenience? Did it ever occur to you that I might be a victim in all of this? I have a family to get back to, and the only person amongst the three of you who cares about me and my family's welfare is the one you two are teaming up against. You can say I am not loyal. You can even call it treason if you like. I made the right decision for my family. Obina concluded as he turned to walk away. Where is he holding them? Titus asked, his eyes looking straight at Obina's direction, waiting for him to turn around. It's too late. You are the price for their freedom. Obina replied as he stopped in his tracks. What are you asking him? King Dyke asks Titus. He's betraying you because my father has kidnapped his family. Delivering us to him is the price for their freedom. Titus replied, I always admire your ability to read situations clearly. Your great instinct is the only reason why we have survived most of the attacks. But you still failed to see what was right in front of you. I'm sorry, but I love my family more than whatever this quest is. Obina said to Titus. We have new orders. The leader of the assassins said to Obina. What? Obina replied. We are to remain in Slave City and keep watch over the prisoners until we get word that it's safe to travel. The assassin replied. Wait, you're mistaken. Elder David promised I won't be harmed and he's keeping to his promise. But the next time you address him as Elder David will be the last time you use your tongue. The assassin interrupted Obina mid-sentence. Ha ha ha. We're now many that want to get that tongue off. Should have done it when I had the chance. Titus chuckled as he muttered words to himself. What did you say? The assassin asked Titus. Nothing important. Just that we're thirsty and can do with some water. He replies. You're my prisoner, not my guest. If you're thirsty, drink your piss. The assassin answered Titus as he placed chains on the three men. No, don't chain him, you need to kill that one. He will be very dangerous. Obina pleads with the assassins as he sees them placing chains on Scar. Dangerous to us or you? The assassin asked Obina. We're spending the night here at the castle and enjoying a match tomorrow at noon. So get ready to watch him die in the fighting pits. Hopefully that will turn you on since you're all about killing someone. The assassin concluded as all his men bursted into laughter. Titus turned his head to look at King Dyke as he heard this plan to make them fight in the pits. We're not leaving anytime soon, he said to King Dyke, trying to keep his voice low to avoid getting into trouble with their captors. What do you mean? King Dyke asked Titus, whispering too. Once you get into those fighting pits, the only way you're getting out is if you're the last man standing. And if you are, you will keep fighting here until someone finally kills you in the pits. We're never getting back to Zimba, Titus said to the king with a grim look on his face. What are you two chattering about like little girls? The assassin asked, looking curiously at Titus. King Dyke and Titus immediately bowed their heads and stopped talking as the armed assassin walked close to them. I asked you a question. As he raised his hand to hit Titus, a voice from behind startled them. Enough, the strange man says. They are not your plaything. Get them to their cells at once. Tomorrow, they will join the others in the training for the tournament, he said to the armed men. Turning to King Dyke and Titus, the stranger introduced himself. You must be Titus. Your reputation precedes you. I am Invictus, the commander in charge here. Pardon my men if they were being rude. King David has sent word that we should be expecting you. He wanted you dead, but because of the respect we have for you and your contribution to the games in this city, the council begged him to let you return to the pits instead. The man said to Titus, And what will happen to my king? Titus asks Invictus, Your king? Who? This man with you? He is to remain prisoner here until the tournaments are over. If you don't die in the pits, then you will be sent back to your father in Zimba. Let's hope your king is still alive to follow you back on that journey." Invictus replied, "And who is this third fellow with you? I wasn't informed you had another person coming with you." Invictus asked Titus, "Maybe just a little surprise package for you to deal with. Should you try harming King Dyke?" Titus replied with a smile on his face. "Oh, I see. Still got a sense of humor, who?" retorted Invictus. "I will see to it that both of you meet at some point in the tournament. Let's see who gets to deal with who." With those words, the commander ordered his men to take Titus and Scar into the cells where other slaves were kept. As they were being led away, Titus screamed, "Save the king!" The men laughed at him as though he was a madman. King Dyke, on the other hand, was chained and thrown into an underground cell, with nothing but rats as companions. Outside the city gate, General Erasmus and his men were getting impatient. Titus was supposed to send word as soon as he got into the castle. One of the servants in the castle was placed there as a spy to communicate whatever was happening to the general and his team. When the general lifted up his eyes and saw the boy running as if he was being pursued, he knew there was trouble. "Boy, what's the matter? Slow down." General Erasmus screamed at the boy who was gasping for breath. "What happened? Are they in?" The general asks again. "I'm sorry, sir, but they've been captured," the servant replied. "Captured by who?" The general and his men listened with disgust and anger as the servant narrated the whole story to them. "I knew we should never have trusted that hunter," General Erasmus said in frustration. "Did he give the sign as he was being led away?" The general queried the servant. Titus and Erasmus had an agreement that should things go south, he would give a sign to the servant who would let the army know whether to launch an attack on the castle or not. What they didn't plan for was Obinna, who no one knew was working against them all along. Obinna knew. He must have informed King David's men. They separated them. King Dyke is in a separate cell. I don't know where. Any rash action and they will kill him, the servant replied. But hang on. As if remembering something, the servant said as Erasmus and his men halted and turned to him. "What is it, boy?" the general asked. While they were being led away, Titus screamed something and the men were laughing at him. The servant said, "Did you hear what he said?" The general asked him. "I only heard the king," the servant replied. "Did he say save the king?" Erasmus asked. "I think that should be it." The servant nodded in agreement. Immediately Erasmus heard this. He barked a command at his men, who immediately got ready to march on the castle. "Go, boy, that is the signal we need. Be gone at once," General Erasmus said, turning to the servant. The boy took to his heels and ran back the way he had come. Erasmus has been dreaming and preparing for this day to come. A day when he would march his army through the city gate, taking down everything and anyone who dares to stand on his way to saving his brothers enslaved in the fighting pits. When Titus approached him and told him of his quest to seize his father's gold mine and take the kingdom of Zimba, Erasmus had told Titus that the mission would only be possible if they could free the slaves and convince them to join their cause. The plan was to build one mighty army that no one could defeat. Both men had planned to cause a slave revolt when Titus gets into the castle. But plan B was to invade should their main plot fail. Now, with Titus captured and enslaved again, Erasmus is left with invasion as the only option. The big challenge, however, is that King Dyke, who was to lead the charge to take Zimba, is now also in captivity and they don't know where. Back at Zimba, David was beginning to get his people to unite behind him, even though there were still voices of dissent. His planned marriage to the daughter of King Atiphal's had put the entire kingdom in some celebratory mood. Since the death of Titus's mother, David had stayed single. Despite recent discoveries about him, he truly loved his late wife and had chosen to honor her memory by remaining single. However, now that he was king, marriage was no longer about love but a duty he must perform for the future of the kingdom. David's search for a wife didn't take long, as he had always admired King Atiphal's and wanted to forge an alliance with the kingdom of Amoda. Princess Amina of Amoda, the first daughter of King Atiphal's, was also a very pretty damsel. So an alliance was always going to come pretty and strong for David and his kingdom of Zimba. But with David, there's always an ulterior motive. People close to had confessed to just how selfish he was, and they all agreed that he could do just about anything to get whatever he wanted. The challenge, though, is King Atafals can also be a handful. King David, my friend, I do not want to get involved in your local affairs. But tell me, what happens if Dyke returns, and with a powerful army? Your kingdom is offering nothing other than a king in this arrangement. King Atafals says to David, who was listening attentively, Dyke is not going to be your problem. However, if either of our kingdoms were to be faced with an invasion, the other is duty-bound to respond and help out in such conflict. David replied, also, there's trade to think about. Our two kingdoms can do with some overhaul in our trade agreements, and being in-laws could help with our negotiations. You need us more than we need you in this regard. David concluded, so you would have me sell my daughter and army to you just for some gold? King Atafals asked David. We're allies, we come to each other's aid. You won't be selling anything. David replied, very well, but we want to have some stake in your gold mine. We don't just want some cash gifts from you to solve our problems. We want to be part of the business. That way we can guarantee the money will keep flowing in for us. Atafals replied. The two men sat for long hours discussing the terms of the agreement upon which Princess Amina will become Queen of Zimba. Once agreement was struck, wedding plans began. David wanted a grand wedding. He wanted to use the wedding as a way of announcing to neighboring kingdoms and cities that his kingdom is the new power in town. From the guest list to the grand festival David organized in preparation for the great day, it was all a spectacle. The most interesting part of the preparatory events was the tournament, known as the Great Games. The Great Games were organized when a huge event in the kingdom like a royal wedding or the birth of the heir were being celebrated. The games featured wrestling matches between knights of the kingdom, horse race, hunting, and lots of feasts to honor foreign dignitaries. In his bid to please the people of Zimba, King David announced that the Great Games would not only feature contestants from the Kingdom of Zimba, but neighboring kingdoms were also allowed to participate with their champion. On the first day of the competition, word filtered in that King Dyke and Titus had been captured in Slave City and were being held captive on the orders of King David. This was not good for David, who people believed was trying so hard to get in the good books of his people. This discontent would gradually spread as the games wore on. Soon enough, General Erasmus would hear of the events happening in Zimba, and this changed everything. The Great Games will be on for another fortnight. General Erasmus addresses his men. We have to storm Slave City now and head for the castle to rescue Titus and the king. If we fail, they die. But if we succeed, this will be our only chance to infiltrate the Great Games and seize the kingdom of Zimba. General Erasmus was right. With all his planning, he is yet to figure out how to get Titus out of the pits alive with no way of communicating. None of his spies have been able to report a position on the king. And now, his only chance at getting into Zimba undetected has presented itself, only it will be gone in 2 weeks. Also, to add to the dilemma faced by General Erasmus, King David's alliance with King Atafals of Amota spells doom for any planned attack on Zimba. So the only way to win this war is to attack before the final day of the Great Games, when the wedding ceremony will be held and all agreements signed. After weighing all the options before him, General Erasmus decided to advance on Slave City. Still maintaining his element of surprise, General Erasmus was able to breach the gates of Slave City. His army was swift and strong. The first wave of the attack was smooth for his men. He kept no prisoners. In just a few hours of intense battle, his men painted the streets of Slave City with the blood of the soldiers at the gates. But as soon as the bell rang, the real battle began. Unknown to General Erasmus, his element of surprise was not so much a surprise since Obina was still in Slave City. They were anticipating the attacks and had left only a few men at the gates to deceive Erasmus. It was all a trap. As his men marched towards the castle, they found the surprise of their life. Arrows were flying from all corners. It was a bloodbath. The sight was that of horror for Erasmus, who watched on as his nearly 2,000 men were slain, leaving only but a few who were taken prisoners alongside the general. You should have turned back when you could, Obina says to Erasmus as he is dragged before the council. Erasmus spits on him with blood covering his entire face. I always knew you were a coward. Didn't know you would also betray your king. The general replies to him, Are there any more of your men we should be expecting? One the slave masters asks Erasmus. Even if they were, why should I help you? The general asks the slave master in bewilderment. This your stone castle will fall before I die. Every last one of you will feel the wrath of my men, and we will march out of here, trampling upon your bones like the sands of the earth. Your only saving grace would be to kill me now, Erasmus declares. Everywhere was silent. The slave masters turned to look at themselves and then back at Erasmus before they all burst out laughing uncontrollably. And just to satisfy our curiosity, how do you plan on doing this again? One of the slave masters asks the general. Seeing that his bid to get them to kill him has failed, Erasmus bowed his head and subbed silently. You will join Titus in the pits, and hopefully one of you gets to kill the other. Otherwise, it will be our pleasure to watch you die at the Great Games. The lead slave master said to Erasmus. The mention of the Great Games shocked Erasmus. It immediately occurred to him that these men were not planning to kill him and Titus here. The plan has always been to humiliate them for sports, then drag them to the Great Games where they will be hanged alongside King Dyke. So all the talks of King David trying to get his people to love him were lies. He was not trying to win their love. He only wanted to fish out those still loyal to King Dyke so he could hang them as traitors alongside King Dyke on the final day of the Great Games. General Erasmus felt like a fool. How has he not seen this coming? He could have mounted a siege outside of Zimba and he would have rescued Titus and King Dyke when they are being transported to the games. But now he will have to join Titus in the pits, hoping they don't die at the hands of the slaves they had come to set free. Cheer up. At least you still get to see an old friend before you die. Obina taunts Erasmus as he is being led away. Titus was shocked when he saw Erasmus being cleaned up for the fights in the pits. He left where he was sitting with the other slaves to immediately go talk to him. What happened? Titus asks Erasmus. I'm sorry, I failed you. I tried invading the city to rescue you and the king. The Great Games at Zimba. Your father plans to execute you and the king on the final day. Erasmus replied, We don't have much time. I have enough men here to stage a revolt already. If only you had kept your men alive, it would have been easier. But don't worry. We don't need to invade Zimba. We only need to be at the games. Titus said to Erasmus. What are you saying? How do we get out of here alive? And what of the king? Erasmus asked in confusion. We need to survive the first fight. They want me to kill Scar in the first fight or he kills me. We are going to refuse to fight. They are expecting that already, which is where our main plan comes into play. The other slaves that will be released into the pits to kill us will help start the revolt. Once we are able to kill the masters at the pits, we will escape during the commotion. Titus replied, Brilliant plan, but this is where I ask, what about the king? I thought he was central to all your plans. General Erasmus asked Titus. As you said, they will not kill King Dyke in Slave City. How do we even know he is still here? When we escape from here, we will head for Zimba and find a way to get into the city. There we will find people who are sympathetic to our course. Many people hate my father already. We just need to find them. Titus replied. And what is to stop the slave masters from sending men after us? How do we outrun all their soldiers and their spies? Did you think of that? What of my brothers? Are we to sacrifice them too? General Erasmus asks Titus, getting furious with the plot. I don't have all the answers, but I believe once the revolt starts, there's no stopping it. All the slaves will revolt, the masters and their soldiers will not be able to stop us even if they try. We will outnumber them. There's strength in numbers, you know. Titus replied, Do you know how many slaves will die from this plan of yours? I've already lost about 2,000 men today, and you are telling me your grand plan to salvation is to sacrifice more, possibly my brothers inclusive. Erasmus asked Titus as he turned and walked away from him. Shortly after the heated debate between Titus and Erasmus, the bell rang. It was time for the pit fight. Erasmus raised his head to look for Titus. As their eyes met, both men recognized immediately what was at stake, but they maintained their disagreement on how to proceed. Will Erasmus trust Titus just one more time, leaving the fate of his brothers to the willingness of the other slaves to join in the revolt, or will he stand down and refuse to partake in the plans? Doing so might mean accepting defeat, but it will also mean his brothers get the chance to decide their own fate. Is Titus willing to risk it all for a chance to face his father at the Great Games, or will he succumb to death in the pits? Watch out for part 3 of The Warrior Dwarf. If you made it to the end of part 2 of this thrilling story, then all I can say is congratulations and thank you. These videos really take a lot of time to make, but you guys' support really keep me going. Comments below and share this video with your friends and family. Also, like and subscribe to the channel so that you'll be the first to be notified when I drop a new video.